Hello, this is Sister Damien Marie Savino. I'm a Franciscan Sister of the Eucharist, and I serve as the Dean of Science and Sustainability at Aquinas College in Grand Rapids, Michigan, on the west side of the state. A little bit about myself. I have a doctorate in environmental engineering, master's degrees in theology and soil science, and an undergraduate degree in the sciences from McGill University in Montreal. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your Hopkins Waterton Environmental Symposium. It's an honor really to be counted among your speakers. My thanks especially to Kian Carnegie and all who assisted him in organizing this symposium. A little bit about myself. I travel quite a bit speaking on issues related to the interface between ecology and theology, or science and theology. I live in Michigan on a 230-acre farm. It's a working farm and natural area with animals, a garden, an orchard, a restored prairie, and nature trails. I take care of the laying chickens, and I love to walk and hike. So in both my work and spirituality, I'm very interested and invested in environmental issues, and I've always had a deep love of creation. So that's what's motivating my talk and all my work in this area. Now I'd like to share screen and begin my talk. The title of my talk today is Laudato Si in the Kingfisher, a shared pilgrimage from the landscape to the inscape. And what I'd like to do in this lecture is take you on a little journey, a kind of spiritual pilgrimage moving from the created world, the exterior landscape, within to what Gerard Manley Hopkins calls our inscape. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. So keep this image of the kingfisher diving in your mind. So diving downward from above, from the exterior landscape into the depths of the water to catch a fish and back out again. And then also I will be speaking about this as a Franciscan dynamic, and I'll share about that a little more in a minute as well. So basically, I'm going to propose in this lecture that this dynamic from the landscape to the inscape and back out again is a beautiful Franciscan model for ecological conversion, and one that I believe could ultimately lead us to really true and lasting solutions to ecological challenges. This is the view out my office window just a couple of weeks ago. And as I was working on this talk, it was snowing gently, and I heard a bird, a rattling sound, a rattling call, and I realized it's a kingfisher. So this is the kind of kingfisher that we have in the United States. They're such stunning birds, and they've always been one of my favorites, but they're not very commonly heard on our campus. So what an amazing confluence that as I was meditating on Hopkins and the mystery of the kingfisher in his poem, and as you have made it the theme of your conference, a kingfisher should show up right outside my office window. And he definitely made himself known because he continued his rattling call for quite some time while I worked. I took it as a beautiful natural and spiritual confirmation of the mysteries that your symposium is contemplating, and it certainly inspired this lecture. So I begin my talk in that spirit with the accompaniment of the kingfisher. Gerard Manley Hopkins' beautiful poem, Kingfishers Catch Fire. Now, I'm not an English professor, but I do love poetry. And my religious community, the Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist, really love Hopkins as well. So what is Hopkins saying in the poem, and how does it relate to ecological conversion and the theme of my lecture? Hopkins begins his poem by recounting his observations of the kingfisher. And on the picture on the top there, doesn't it look like it's about to catch fire? The way the light shines on its wings in the photo of this Eurasian kingfisher on this slide. This inspires a reflection in Hopkins on how each mortal thing, each piece of creation, each species does one and the same, speaks itself, speaks its inner form and nature, and cries out who it is to the world. What I do is me, for that I came. Each creature has a place and acts out of the uniqueness of its being. And so this is the inscape, as I understand it. It's the unique design and form that constitutes the identity of the kingfisher as kingfisher. So keep this image of the kingfisher in your mind, and then the lower image as well. So where they dive into the water to catch their prey, and then they come back out again. It's just a beautiful image, first of catching fire, and then plunging into the process of ecological conversion. And can we do so with the vigor of the kingfisher? Then Hopkins continues, and he turns now to humans. Who are we humans? We say more. Like the kingfisher, we act in God's eye, when in God's eye we are. But for humans, who we are in God's eye cannot be separated from Christ, because Christ is within us, within each one of us. He plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his, the features of each human face. So Christ is within us as Christians, stamped on our inner form and nature. This is what it means to be created in the image and likeness of God. And this is our human inscape. Like the kingfisher reflects its creator to the world to the beauty of its form, our inscape as humans is illuminated by God's grace, which we then reflect to the world. And in effect, we're called as humans to reflect Christ to the world. We talk about that all the time in our faith. This is particularly evident in the saints, as pictured in this icon of St. Francis of Assisi on the slide. His inscape was so conformed to Christ that he actually received the stigmata, which was then actually imprinted on his flesh, on his exterior features. But it's not just for the saints. Each of us is human and possesses this kind of unique dignity by virtue of our creation in the image and likeness of God. And so Hopkins' poem inspires me to think of our lives as a pilgrimage from the exterior landscape within to our interior landscape or inscape, and then back out again. And again, think of that image of the kingfisher hovering in the air and then diving down into the water and then coming out again. And now what I'd like to share with you is that I believe this is truly a Franciscan dynamic, essentially a Franciscan dynamic. Now, I understand that Stonyhurst is a Jesuit institution, but every Jesuit profits from a good dose of Franciscanism every now and again, as Pope Francis himself has shown us. So if you will allow me, I want to share a little bit about what I'm going to cover today and then begin with a bit of Franciscan wisdom. So first, this Franciscan pilgrimage, ecological conversion through the eyes of St. Francis of Assisi in his famous Canticle of the Creatures, "Praise be to you, my Lord, for brother sun and sister moon." I will speak about, so St. Francis is often kind of viewed a bit like the patron saint of the bird bath, and he is that, I suppose, but he goes deeper than that. There's his praise of creatures that he sang about in his Canticle of the Creatures flowed out of the depths of his inner being, out of his inscape. Then next, I will, after the Franciscan introduction, I will introduce you to Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si, on care for our common home. And I will show you here too how even the organization of the encyclical follows this Franciscan theme of the movement from exterior to interior and then back out again. And then I will focus on a particular aspect of the encyclical integral ecology in chapter 4, and a particular type of integral ecology called the ecology of daily life. And basically, we'll look at how paying attention to the ecology of daily life through the lens of this exterior to interior dynamic introduced by Hopkins, and which is part of Franciscan spirituality, can really help us on our own processes of ecological conversion. And then finally, I'd like to look at 3 case studies or practices for how we could put ecological conversion in the way that I'm presenting it here into practice. I hope these will inspire you. So let's begin with a little bit of Franciscan wisdom. And I'm going to draw upon the great Franciscan leader and saint, Saint Bonaventure. Saint Bonaventure sought to put into words what Saint Francis lived, because we don't have a lot of words from Saint Francis. And he envisioned Saint Francis's praise of creatures as a spiritual journey with three major stages. And he outlines these in his spiritual document called the Itinerarium, or Journey of the Soul to God. So Bonaventure says the first stage is the world outside, the exterior world, because we're embodied creatures. So we begin our spiritual pilgrimage there in our interactions with the material world, our senses, how we perceive the world, how we experience it, and in the concrete aspects of our daily lives. Then the second stage is the movement to the world within, to our inner selves, our self-understanding, our knowledge and will, how we know ourselves in relation to the world around us and in relation to our final destiny in God. And then the third step, the world above. So we're always should be living as Christians in light of our eternal destiny, never forgetting the reality of the transcendent of God, our creator. But we don't absent ourselves from the world around us. Rather, creation sort of passes through us back to God. And this is part of our unique role as human persons made in the image and likeness of God. And so you can think of it as a pilgrimage, as Bonaventure portrays it, but think about it for your own life, from creation, the world outside, to the world within yourself, your inner convictions, who and what you care about, how that motivates you, and what it does to motivate your behaviors and live a life of virtue. And then to the world above, to God, giving it all back to God in a sense. And that we continually do this without bypassing the created world throughout our journey of life. And so I like to give a few Franciscan exclamation points here. So note that in this Franciscan pilgrimage, which is at the heart of St. Francis's praise of creatures, we get to the interior by starting with our relationships with the exterior world. Pope Benedict XVI was really strong on this point, and in one of his books called In the Beginning, he said, and I quote, "First the physical, then the spiritual," end quote. So we can't bypass the physical world, or we end up in a kind of empty, non-incarnational spiritualism. No, we embrace natural things. We embrace the created world. We engage with created matter as the entrance point to the spiritual, because it's sacramental. It points to God. And as Chesterton said so well in his biography of St. Francis, the whole philosophy of St. Francis revolved around the idea of a new supernatural light on natural things, which meant the ultimate recovery, not the ultimate refusal of natural things. So that's point number one. A second, I think, exclamation point on the Franciscan pilgrimage is to emphasize that there's a link between external and internal realities. And this is said so well by Pope Benedict in this quote: "The external deserts are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast." So there are two kinds of ecology, if you will, an outer ecology and an inner ecology, what Hopkins calls the inscape. And in our contemporary culture, we suffer from serious dissonances, I would say, between these two ecologies. Dissonances that must be resolved so there's some kind of harmony between our inner and outer landscapes. And so ecological conversion, as I'm presenting it here, is about resolving these dissonances between our external and internal ecologies. Pope Benedict reminds us in this quote that who we are inside is visible from how we act in the world. So the environmental degradation, which we despair of in the created realities around us in our land and water and air, really reflects an interior degradation in our own souls. Again, think of the image of the kingfisher above the water, then diving down into the interior waters and coming back out again. So when we deny the truth, for example, of created realities as being a gift to us from God, as having limits which we must respect, when we refuse to learn the grammar of creation and block our ears from listening to what the created world is speaking to us, when we become indifferent to the cry of nature, in short, when our own internal ecology becomes degraded and compromised, that's reflected in the degradation and pollution of the world around us. And Pope Francis then adds to this by telling us that there are so many kinds of deserts, not only physical deserts, but also these internal deserts of poverty, the desert of hunger and thirst, the desert of abandonment, of loneliness, of destroyed love. There is also, he says, the desert of God's darkness, the emptiness of souls no longer aware of their dignity or the goal of human life, or perhaps not even aware of God himself. And so what we need to do is to enter into this dynamic of moving into our inscape in order to restore our internal deserts so that we can shine a bright light to the world around us about a restored ecology. So I think this is the kind of conversion that Pope Francis is encouraging in Laudato Si, and it's too often overlooked or underemphasized in the very good intentions of developing a lot of initiatives for ecological restoration. But the Pope tells us clearly that the ecological crisis is also, at its heart, a summons to a profound interior conversion. And when we say conversion, the word conversion means both a turning away from the bad and a turning toward the good. I'm emphasizing here in this talk that it also requires a turning within, from the landscape to our inscape. And so, as in Hopkins' poem, when we turn within in this movement of conversion, we become aware of Christ within us and of his grace. And then the encounter with Christ is reflected out of us, in our eyes, as Hopkins says, or in our behaviors. It becomes evident in our relationship with the world around us. And this dynamic, says the Pope, is not optional. So it's essential to living a life of virtue. And I would say that this kind of pilgrimage dynamic is an effective path to virtue for us. So working on ecological conversion this way and the turn within is a way into a deeper, more intense living of Catholicism. And I think it's especially essential in today's culture because we tend to lack an inner life. I recently had someone say to me, my reliance on devices is sucking me out of me. And so we need to work hard on turning within and going deeper into our inscape in order to enter into these true processes of ecological conversion. And again, think of this image here. So now, if I could take a moment to introduce us to the encyclical, Pope Francis's encyclical on care for our common home that came out in 2015. Laudato Si is actually an Umbrian title. It is the first encyclical that has a non-Latin title, and it means praise be to you. So it's the first words of St. Francis of Assisi's Canticle of the Creatures. The subtitle is Care for Our Common Home. And the use of the word care is very deliberate in the encyclical. I remember when I first read it, I was so struck because I hardly saw the word stewardship anywhere, and I just kept seeing the word care. And later I did a Google search and I found out that the word care is used 38 times throughout the encyclical. And I think stewardship, if I recall correctly, was used only once or twice. So what does care mean? Well, it has this sense of safekeeping, careful consideration, protective attentiveness, affection for, nursing, ministering to, and it actually comes from the Latin cogitates, which means to think or ponder. So there's a sort of contemplative undergirding to this sense of care, that our care is grounded in attentive listening to creation. And so the Pope speaks throughout Laudato Si about the need to create a culture of care through our ecological conversion. And I would like to now show you just briefly the organization of the encyclical, because I would say that how it's organized even reflects a fundamentally Franciscan dynamic that we've been speaking about, and the one that Hopkins' Kingfisher poem points to, this pilgrimage from the outer world to the inner world, our inscape, and then back out again. And so I think this is a core message of the document, showing us sort of in a way by its very organization, the path to ecological conversion for us. Now, in the introduction, Pope Francis speaks of St. Francis of Assisi as an exemplar of the kind of ecology and ecological conversion that he's speaking about. Then he starts right away with the science, so the exterior, what's happening in the world around us. And here he speaks about the main science issues he speaks of are climate change and pollution, water quality and quantity, and biodiversity. So certainly the key ecological issues, and he was informed by scientists in the preparation of this document. Also in this chapter, he coins a new term called rapidification, so referring to this rapid pace of contemporary society and our kind of almost irrational confidence in technology and progress and human abilities. And he warns us or challenges us, and not just Catholics, but the whole world, to become painfully aware, to turn what is happening in the world into our own personal suffering. So again, this interior movement of so identifying with the suffering of the groaning of creation that we feel it as our own personal suffering. So primarily the focus of this chapter is the exterior, what's happening in the exterior world. Then in chapter 2, he goes into the theology, and he calls this the gospel of creation. So brings the theology into dialogue with the science, which is a good model for us, and shares his conviction that theology is important and it can contribute to the ecological questions in the world today and to the full development of humanity. And also he emphasizes that Christians need to realize that their responsibility to care for creation are an essential part of their faith. And then another key aspect in this chapter is that he mentions, or he emphasizes, that there are 3 fundamental relationships with God, with others, and with the earth. Now, we've all heard love God and love your neighbor. Pope Francis is adding really here, although it's always been in the tradition, but he's very explicitly stating here, love creation. So when we examine ourselves for our sins, we need to examine how's our relationship with God, how's our relationship with others, and how's our relationship with the earth. And we need to learn this gospel of creation that is written in the exterior world all around us, pointing us to the Creator. Then in chapter 3, he begins the move within. So we're starting with the exterior, and now the Kingfisher is plunging into the water here, and he says we really can't look at the symptoms of the ecological crisis, Pope Francis says, without acknowledging the human origins of it. So the scientific issues are external symptoms or manifestations of an underlying internal disorder in us. And in this chapter 3, he's diagnosing that internal disorder. And he identifies 2 human roots, and I'll look at them just a little bit more in a moment. But the first is the technocratic paradigm and all that goes with it. Not that technology in itself is bad, but when it sort of runs us and becomes a technocracy, an ideology, and a sense of dominion and domination and unlimited growth. So that's problematic. And the second root, he said, is what he calls misguided anthropocentrism. Basically, we don't know who we are anymore. We've lost track of who we are as humans. And we've lost really that deep sense of uniqueness that Hopkins celebrates in his poem. Then after this turn within, then the Pope Francis says, well, here's my solution, integral ecology, what he calls integral ecology, which is basically the marriage of natural and human ecology, because we don't have 2 crises, one that's environmental and one that's social. We have one intertwined and complex crisis, which is in which the natural and human ecology you can't be separated. And so in order to kind of root out those interior disorders that he identifies in chapter 3, he says we really have to learn how to practice integral ecology, where our solutions benefit the natural, and the human ecology. Then, yes, there are two more chapters, and this is basically the Kingfishers coming out of the water now, because these two chapters are, how do we put this into practice? So chapter 5, lines of approach and action, kind of the macro. So in politics, economics, international development, what are some ideas for how we can promote integral ecology? And then chapter 6, the micro, in ecological education and spirituality, in the family. So what are sort of micro ideas for how we can live integral ecology? And in this talk, I'll focus a little bit on chapters 3, 4, and then 6 with the practices that I propose at the end. Okay, so a little bit about these interior chapters. So this inscape in chapter 3, the roots of the ecological crisis. And so the two roots, as I said, misguided anthropocentrism and the technocratic paradigm or ideology. The anthropocentrism has led us into this kind of schizophrenia, he says, where we vacillate between a sense of dominance that technocracy leads us into. We can do everything ourselves, we can control everything, versus this other extreme of biocentrism, where there's no special value in human beings. And in fact, it might be better if we just kind of X'd ourselves out of the equation. So we have this misguided anthropocentrism that gets mixed up between those extremes, and we don't have a healthy sense of who we are in the midst of all of this. And both of those extremes are representative of a disordered internal ecology that is then reflected out of us in the way that we treat creation. And then the throwaway culture is something that Pope Francis really decries throughout Laudato Si. It's kind of a self-centered culture of instant gratification. And he says it's underpinned by a logic of selfishness, violence, even exploitation, because everything is irrelevant unless it serves one's immediate needs. And a part of this, so consumption, our kind of obsession with consumption is a problem, which leads us to throw away people as well as things, because what's in the interior affects how we treat other people as well, not only how we treat the earth. And then he mentions here too this idea that we need to accept our bodies as God's gift, rather than a kind of technocratic sense that we have absolute power over our bodies. And that's all part of what he envisions as a throwaway culture. And then he's also very hard on this, what he calls a sin of indifference. So, which is bred, he believes, by the technocratic paradigm. So we kind of praise technical thought and advancement over reality. And so that has resulted in the intrinsic dignity of created things being compromised, because the cosmos is kind of viewed in a utilitarian way as a mere space into which objects can be thrown with indifference. And so he's basically making the point that the broad range of external forms of pollution with which the earth is currently afflicted are mirroring a deeply afflicted interior landscape. So ecological imbalances are occurring because humans are interiorly off balance. And our inscape is polluted in effect, and this is being reflected in the pollution that we're experiencing around us exteriorly. So how do we now begin to root out some of that interior pollution as a means of eventually curing the exterior pollution or healing the exterior pollution? Well, in chapter 4, Pope Francis puts forth his ideas about integral ecology, and much more work needs to be done on this. And maybe some of you will end up doing some work to really say, what do we mean by integral ecology? But he gives us an outline of 7 basic kinds of ecology that he sees as part of living this integral ecology and healing both natural and human ecologies. And the one I'd like to focus on is the ecology of daily life, the 5th kind that's in this chapter 4 of the encyclical. So what does he mean by the ecology of daily life? Well, it has exterior meanings. So And here I'm quoting directly from the encyclical. So it basically has to do with the interrelationship between our living spaces and our human behaviors. So it's the setting in which people live. It could be our rooms, our homes, our workplaces, our neighborhoods, our yards. And unfortunately, in some cases, pollution is just a daily part of everybody's setting. And that's a problem. But he says we need to develop designs that enhance our ecology of daily life, so that don't pollute, but that actually increase our sense of belonging, of rootedness, of feeling at home, that makes us feel like we have a meaningful framework for our lives. And as an engineer, I look at this and think, are we really doing this with our designs? Do we think about this enough? And I really tried to think about that in the science building at Aquinas College, which I was involved in helping to design. So what we need are spaces which connect people, which relate and favor the recognition of others, and that also connect people with nature, I would say. And then he said, the ecology of daily life doesn't only govern these external realities of our environment, but also our internal environment. So the relationship between human life and the moral law that's inscribed in our nature, in our inscape. Because he says, man too has a nature that he must respect and that he cannot manipulate at will. So the Pope makes clear that an ecology of daily life embraces a consistent life ethic, which recognizes the intrinsic dignity of things independent of their usefulness. So that goes from something like a Brazilian rainforest, he says, to a poor person, but it also includes a human embryo, a person with disabilities. So that's an important aspect of the ecology of daily life in the Pope's thinking. So basically, this ecology of daily life that Pope Francis calls us to in Laudato Si is a movement from the landscape to the inscape and back again. So from that exterior ecology to interior ecology, and then back to exterior ecology, and hopefully in a new or restored way. And when we embark on this pilgrimage, we grow over time in our capacity for what Pope Francis calls serene attentiveness, that we have, when our interior ecology is at peace, we have an attitude of the heart which can approach life with serene attentiveness, capable of being fully present to someone without thinking of what comes next, which accepts each moment as a gift from God to be lived to the full. Jesus had this attitude. He was completely present to everyone and to everything. And in this way, he showed us the way to overcome that unhealthy anxiety, which makes us superficial, aggressive, and compulsive consumers. So this is what we seek in this whole pilgrimage, and that I've been outlining for you, is that ability to be serenely attentive. And that is so key to our own ecological conversion. And it takes time to get there. But I think if we continually go through this dynamic process of exterior to interior and back to exterior in a new way, we gradually grow in this capacity for serene attentiveness. And that's to God, to others, and to the created world. So now I'd like to look at these 3 case studies or practices that I thought might be inspiring for you, or at least that might inspire discussion. So first, a daily exam, and this is something I developed and I often share with my students, and I thought it might be helpful for you as a way to practice this pilgrimage that I'm speaking about, from the landscape to the inscape, so that it might give you a sense of a concrete way to embark on an ecological conversion. And then a more exterior practice, but one that I think informs the interior, is at Aquinas College, we have a zero waste initiative. And I thought I could share that because I think it's a beautiful way to put into practice the kind of dynamic that I've been speaking about. And then third, I've been working on new forms of ecological education that guide persons into experiences with nature, experiences that also incorporate that turn within. And this is something I've done for my religious community, the Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist, and we're calling it the Educating for Laudato Si initiative. And we just put together a website that just went up about a month ago. And I wanted to make you aware of this as well. It might be something that you'd like to look into. Okay. So this idea of a spiritual examen for the ecology of daily life. So I had to include something from the Jesuit tradition. I didn't want to overwhelm you too much with the Franciscan emphasis in the talk. And an examen, as you may well be aware of, is in the Jesuit tradition. And it's a way of looking at our day and examining ourselves and our relationships, basically our relationships with God, with others, and with the earth. And from what I did was I developed an examen for the ecology of daily life, drawing directly from those paragraphs 147 to 55 in Laudato Si that refer to the ecology of daily life. And in those, he speaks about what I see as three major categories: our physical spaces, our bodies, and our daily actions. So the examen focuses on those three categories. And just to remind then, as a spiritual examen, so is a turn within. So, and when we turn within, the first thing we have to do is recognize our sins and our faults, where we've gone wrong. And I do think it's a helpful practice, maybe at night before you go to bed, to take 3 or 4 minutes or longer, if you like, to become aware within ourselves. Okay, what went well today? How were my relationships? Which relationships were positive? Where did I have some issues? Where was it bumpy? And that hopefully awakens a desire to change. Gosh, I'm not treating this person very well, or I littered today, or my room is a mess, and I really desire to change that. So this examen helps you in that process, helps you to become aware, because the first step is to become aware. Then through doing this, we realize that our conversion it is personal to us, but it's also communal. So the more we do this, the more it helps us to broaden out to others. And then it helps us to grow in an attitude of gratitude and gratuitousness. So to make sure that as practice, in practicing the examen, that we also thank God for the many blessings of the day. And then we realize that more and more, and I think in terms of putting this as an ecological examen or ecological process of ecological conversion, we have to recognize how connected we are to all creatures, and that every creature is reflecting something of God and has a message to convey to us. So in our examen, we can ask, where did I miss the messages? It could be from persons with whom I'm in relationship. It could be with God, or it could be from nature too. And then embracing the truth that creation, as Pope Francis emphasizes throughout Laudato Si, is of the order of love. And that includes us. So we are very much loved by God. And each element in creation, each creature is loved by God. And so we need to recognize that, because I think many times we don't recognize the love that motivates everything that's around us, because we can get a little bit upset by all the difficult things and negative things that are happening. But to know that love has triumphed and love is around us everywhere that we look. Okay, so the examen now. So let's look at some of the practicals. So I'll give you a quote for each of the three areas, and then some questions that can be used in your practice of the examen. So for physical spaces and the environment, the first category, men and women have constantly intervened in nature, says the Pope. But for a long time, this meant being in tune with and respecting the possibilities offered by the things themselves. It was a matter of receiving what nature itself allowed, as if from its own hand. But now we are the ones to lay our hands on things, attempting to extract everything possible from them, while frequently ignoring or forgetting the reality in front of us. Human beings and material objects no longer extend a friendly hand to one another. The relationship has become confrontational. So here's that technocratic paradigm that attempts to extract everything in kind of a domineering way, without thinking of the needs of the other thing, whether it's a person or that aspect of creation. So how do we treat the reality around us with which we've been entrusted? Because we've all been entrusted with different realities. Do we treat it according with a sense of that it's a gift? And then when you receive a gift, you respond with gratitude. Do we practice that in our daily lives? Are we willing to sacrifice in different ways? Or do we have this fundamental attitude of taking and not giving back? So we don't want to be confrontational, even with our physical spaces and environment. So here I thought to get really practical with this. So what do my physical surroundings look like? And again, this could apply to your rooms, your homes, your offices. Are they clean or messy? And if you could see my whole office now, I'm afraid my desk is messier than I would like to be. So I always have to look at that. Is it pristine or polluted? Am I polluting? Am I littering? Then looking at some of the design connections, do my spaces promote or break interconnections? So think about that. Do they increase a sense of belonging so that when someone comes into the physical spaces for which I'm responsible, do they feel like they're at home? Do they feel like they're part of a community? And so these are just good questions to kind of examine ourselves in relation to this first category of the examine. Then the second, my body. So our bodies establish us in a direct relationship with the world around us. So we do need to look at them because we are embodied beings. And we have to accept our bodies as God's gift, just as we accept all creation as God's gift. And if we don't, then it's harder for us to accept creation as a gift from the Father, because we're so used to thinking that everything is just for us to take. And when we don't accept our bodies as gift, we can tend to think that we enjoy absolute power over them. And then that leads us, says the Pope, and I think it beautifully said here, that thinking that we enjoy absolute power over our own bodies turns often subtly into thinking that we enjoy absolute power over creation. So learning to accept our body, to care for it, and to respect its fullest meaning is an essential element of any genuine human ecology. So again, very important to examine ourselves in that arena. And so how do I treat my body and the bodies of others? Do my daily behaviors put my body in a healthy or a diseased relationship with the earth? Do I care well for my body and for the bodies of other living things? And do I honor the natural laws in my body and in the bodies of the persons to whom I relate? This is very important. And I think unless we practice this exterior to interior dynamic, this Franciscan dynamic, we won't even recognize what the natural laws are in our body. So we have to be attuned so that we can be attentive to those laws. Just as we learn to listen to creation, we need to learn to listen to our bodies. And I think too many people really struggle with that today. And then finally, the third, my daily actions. So learning the ancient lesson that less is more. And this is, again, something so important for contemporary society where we tend to think we just need more and more and more, and yet we're never satisfied. So a constant flood of new consumer goods can baffle the heart and prevent us from cherishing each thing in each moment. So it prevents us from having that serene attentiveness. To be serenely present to each reality, however small it may be, opens us to much greater horizons of understanding and personal fulfillment. And again, I think this is such an important truth to recognize. So maybe, and I tell my students to make it practical, maybe if you went on a spending spree, maybe you think about, okay, from now on Friday nights, I'm not going to the mall to shop. I'm going to invite a good friend to have a cup of coffee or to come over to my place and play games or watch a film. So here are some questions for your examine in relation to your daily actions. Are they flowing from a kind of throwaway mentality, real quick with people and with things? Did selfish or even violent attitudes, and we all need to look at that. Where is the anger in our lives and why? Is it rooted sometimes in excessive consumption or even indifference, which is covers over some kind of buried anger that we want to convert. And we want to convert it into a sense of attentiveness, a sense of love and caring for others and for the earth. So those are some thoughts, I think, for a daily examine. And again, with any of this, if any of you would like to contact me, I'd be so happy to speak with you sometime. And I do actually have examine cards that I've made up that I give out sometimes to help people remember these questions so they can do the daily examine. Now, my second, so that's more of an inner movement. Now let's look a little bit at zero waste at our college. And I've put the address here if you want to read a little bit more about it. But we've had this zero waste initiative for many years now, and we're striving basically for composting, recycling, or reusing the majority of our waste. We are not at 100% by any means, but we are in this striving, this dedication. And why are we doing this? Well, to improve the health of natural systems, and we believe this will also enhance the quality of life for our college community and for our neighbors. It will also save us money, so help us with the long-term financial stability of the college. And then one thing that I always like to add is that it really provides, and here we have this exterior, interior dynamic, but it provides an opportunity for virtue training because it really provides a hand-on experience of virtue acquisition. And I'll say a little bit more of that as I show you how we have it set up. So we have these, our recycling stations are placed around the campus and conveniently located where people can see them. And they have a trash unit, a composting unit, a recycling bin, and then a TerraCycle, which is like candy wrappers and snack wrappers and that side of things. And then to encourage participation, we do keep track by building, and we keep track of the monthly diversion rates. So you can see here that in the academic building, that's where a lot of the classes take place. We're 71.5% either composted, recycled, or TerraCycled. Albertus Magnus Hall is a science building, and that's about 59%. And so we're over 50%, and we're seeking always to get better and better toward, we want to be at 100% diverted from the trash, from the landfill. But we have to pay for the landfill waste to be landfilled, and it's more expensive than the industrial composting that we do. So I think it will save money. It saves money for the college in the end. And then we have this quote there, which speaks directly to what I've been talking with you about, that our environment, the world in which we live and work, is a mirror of our attitudes and expectations. So the environment, the external landscape, is a mirror of our internal landscape. So, and this is just to give you a little information. If you're interested, you may do this already at your college, but if you're interested, and there's more information on the website. But so the compostable materials, it's all food scraps. So we compost everything. And then everything in our dining services is compostable. So the silverware, all the paper goods and all that are compostable. So industrially compostable. So there's very little that needs to go into the trash, really, because then in the recyclable materials, and we have it all color coded to help people because there is always the issue of contamination. But so aluminum, tin, glass, plastics, number 1 through 7, and different kinds of paper waste can all go into single stream recycling in the blue bins. And then the orange bins are for TerraCycle. So, any kind of candy wrappers or snack bags, cereal bags, and those kinds of things, some personal care and beauty items. So by the time, I realized how exciting this zero waste initiative is, because usually I have nothing in my trash can in my office and what I discovered was, well, I was bringing my sandwiches in little sandwich baggies, and that they cannot be TerraCycled, recycled, or composted. So then I thought, okay, that's the only thing I'm putting in the garbage, then I will stop doing that. And I got myself glass containers to put my lunches in. So there's something very empowering, and it just feels right, this whole effort toward zero waste. Even tricky items like tissues, Q-tips, gum, they can all be composted. Ziploc bags, as I said, have to go in the trash. Clear plastic, like plastic wrap, has to go in the trash, and styrofoam. So then it highlights, okay, then let's not use these items in our packaging or in our ecology of our daily life. Then the other thing is, we don't put trash cans in classrooms. So we have waste stations, and they're generally, in the middle of the hall and at the end of the halls. So once people learn where they are, they're easily accessible in common areas of the building. And I think not having trash cans has helped people to be a little more attentive to what they're doing with their trash. And then we keep data on all of this. So we have all the dorms, every building on campus, we calculate the diversion rates, and we know then which buildings we need to do more work on. So overall, we are at about a 59% total diversion rate if we average that across the campus. And we're trying hard to, some of our buildings are as high as 72 or 75%, 84%. Others are much lower. And so we work, then our sustainability staff work to try and improve, to find out why is it so low in some of the buildings. And unfortunately, our dorms tend to be on the lower end of things. So we're working very hard with the students and their student leaders about this. Now, this training for virtue, I just want to say a little bit about that, because I use it as an example with my students, the whole Zero Waste Initiative, as an example of how we acquire virtue. At first, you have to be aware. So when I first started doing the zero waste, I had to be aware, okay, what goes where, and what goes in the trash, what can I do with these other things? Then once I started to learn and put everything in its proper place, I realized, okay, I better not use those plastic Ziploc bags anymore, because and so I changed my behavior there, right? And then now when I travel, very often where I go, there's no zero waste. And it really grates on me, because I'm so used to hardly ever having to use the trash, because I always have some either recycling or composting or TerraCycle that I can put my waste in. And I try to use that as an analogy for my students as to how we acquire virtue. First, we have to become aware. Once we start practicing these things, it almost becomes part of our nature. It becomes part of our interior ecology, as I've been speaking about. And so then we really notice when we can't do it. So that's how it feels when we acquire virtue and then we slip from it. So again, I think this is could be a good model. This practice could be a good model for that element of ecological conversion. And then finally, our Educating for Laudato Si initiative, which is a very, I guess, came out of reflecting upon our Franciscan Eucharistic spirituality over the years of our founding since 1973 as a religious community. And we identified a number of pillars, Franciscan pillars, that are kind of part of the DNA of our community. They reflect how we have worked on the land, because all of our centers have land, and we invite persons to come in and work the land with us. And we wanted to reflect on how has this been a way of conversion for others, and a way of coming to love creation, but also a move within. So we basically on this website have highlighted, say, 4 principles that we think are very important in terms of a Franciscan approach coming from the life of St. Francis and his approach to the praise of creatures. And then we have educational materials that describe different experiential activities. They're up right now, there are 22 in different areas, anywhere from gardening to animal care to pilgrimages to nature hikes. And so they explain how you with a group could carry out this activity, this experiential activity, and then engage in the new kind of environmental education, which helps the persons to go within as well through the process of this exterior activity. So, for example, if we're weeding in the garden, we are physically weeding, but it's the purpose of it isn't only to get the weeding done. It's also, we encourage the groups that work with us to reflect on what needs to be weeded in my own life. And so after the experience of several hours working with us, we hope that this touches something in terms of their interior ecology, which will then lead to a bit of conversion, and then the more they come and work, the more conversion. So I put together this website with the collaboration of all the sisters to kind of share with others how we do it, so that you might be able to lead others into that same experience. So I would encourage you to go to the site. It's praisebe2u.org. And there's an email there that you can contact, educating for Laudato Si at F.S.E.community.org. And you can contact us that way, or you can contact me directly through my work email. So thank you very much. I hope that you've enjoyed this talk, and that it has perhaps inspired you. And if it hasn't inspired you, at least illumined your understanding of this ecological conversion dynamic as a movement from the exterior landscape to our inscape. And then as we live life in our pilgrimage of life, constantly going back out again. And hopefully through each of those actions, as we become more restored internally, we will be effective in restoring the earth externally and caring for our common home in a way that's really motivated by our interior love and concern for creation and our love for God, the Creator. So thank you very much. And I wish many blessings on your day, and you will be in my prayers.